Imagine looking through the frosted glass of a marble foyer and seeing your 7-year-old daughter sitting silent on the carpet, tracing the grain of an old wooden box with her finger, while the house hummed with distant footsteps she no longer answered. Nathan Avery, owner of a chain of boutique hotels, had everything the world equated with success: a corner office, an art collection, suits that smelled faintly of cedar, and expensive cologne. Yet the mansion echoed, a soft hollow that matched the hollow in his chest since his wife died 2 years earlier. He had tried therapists, specialists, routine changes, gadgets, even a golden retriever trainer flown in from another state. Nothing cracked the silence. Then one morning, across the city, a little stray with matted fur and a crooked ear wandered onto the sidewalk outside his gate, carrying something small in its mouth. That tiny animal, smelling of rain and leftover takeout, lifted its face and wagged as if it knew the exact place Nathan's heart had been waiting to be touched. Stay with me until the end, and you will see how a small pet and a quiet, stubborn girl remade a family. If this story moves you, subscribe. We tell stories that restore what grief tries to steal. The tone here will be intimate and investigative, a close look at a silence that turned into a laugh. Since the accident, Nathan's life had been a study in careful avoidance. He had been a child who learned to measure words, a young man who learned to negotiate deals with a handshake that smelled of citrus, a husband who had kept memories in boxes lined with tissue. In childhood, he had been taught to swallow fear and present a polished face. He grew up in a house where manners were a currency and doors were rarely left open. At the university, he studied business with a focus on hospitality, learning to craft experiences and mask discomfort. And in his 20s, he met Claire, who brought sunlight into rooms and a laugh that seemed to make the ceilings lower and safer. When Claire died suddenly in a car accident, the house kept her sweater but lost the soundtrack of shared routines. Nathan's therapy sessions were clinical and efficient. Dr. Evans, a noted child psychologist, had given him exercises, charts, small homework for himself and for his daughter. He followed routines like prescriptions, but the daughter, Emma, retreated behind a silence that fell deeper than shyness. He bought toys, a nanny named Rosa who hummed lullabies, and tutors like Miguel who read stories aloud in voices that tried to be characters but fell flat. Friends like Henry and Clara offered condolences that tasted like sugar on the tongue and then dissolved. They visited, they texted, they laughed. The most revealing detail was a small silver bracelet Claire had given Emma, now kept in a drawer, cold and untouched because Emma feared it might hold a memory too heavy to wear. This backstory was an accumulation of small textures: the sour tang of antiseptic in offices, the soft papery feel of condolence cards, the muted color of curtains drawn against weather and memory. Emma's world after the loss was a carefully managed quiet. Her mornings began with the same light leaking through the blinds, the smell of toast left untouched, the tick of a clock on the shelf she used to race toward when small games mattered. She walked through rooms like a ghost, fingers trailing along banisters, avoiding the living room where pictures of Claire were hung like a gallery of wounds. At school, she sat at the end of the art table, pencils lined up but never used, watching the others with eyes that recorded movement but refused to enter the chorus. Her caregiver Rosa described Emma's routine: breakfast at 7, a walk in the courtyard at 9, where she would place her palm flat on the cold stone, and then hours of silence broken only by the occasional hum that seemed like a lost note. The tension inside Nathan was visible in small things. He held his cup too tight in the morning. His voice would catch when he said Emma's name, and he often stood at windows watching delivery trucks pass as if their ordinary noise might carry a cure. Emma had been to 3 speech pathologists and 2 behavioral therapists, and each appointment produced polite optimism and a lingering emptiness that intensified at home. The house was full of objects designed to fix silence: Sound machines, musical toys, apps with bright icons. Yet none felt like the right instrument for the grief that had folded itself around Emma's throat. On the other side of town, in a narrow row house where the air always smelled faintly of frying onions and laundry detergent, lived Rosa Martinez, the nanny who had been with the Averys since Emma was a baby. She woke before dawn, feeling the roughness of the broom handle in her palm, the heat of instant coffee against her tongue, and the rhythm of public transport clattering like a heartbeat. Rosa carried in her purse a faded photograph of her late sister, a small brass bell she rang for luck, and a spare sweater she knitted herself out of practicality and comfort. Her days involved other people's children, small victories like coaxing a laugh, and quiet afternoons in the park where she would hum the lullabies her mother taught her. At the market she knew Maria, who sold oranges with a laugh that smelled of citrus oil. Miguel, the upstairs man who repaired radios and told stories about the sea. Lucas, a teenager who pushed a cart of recyclables and always tipped his cap. Aunt June, a retired school teacher who brought second-hand books. And Mr. Patel, who ran the corner store and kept candies behind the counter for children who asked politely. Rosa's life was a weave of sensory threads. The gritty feel of pavement under her soles, the metallic scent of coins jingling in a pocket, the soft cotton of a sweater she would offer to a shivering child. When Rosa first noticed a skinny stray dog near the gate of the Avery estate, she felt a tug at a familiar place in her chest, the place that recognized overlooked beings as kin. She called the dog Lucky because he seemed to find reasons to wag even when rain had made his fur heavy. Lucky had a small rag tied around his neck, a piece of cloth with a faded pattern, and he carried with him the scent of old bread and city rain. The first contact between Emma and Lucky was almost accidental, but once it happened, it began to repeat like a small ritual. On a gray morning, Nathan opened the gate to leave for a meeting, and Lucky slid under the rail, tongue lolling, a soft sound like a sack of flour sighing. Emma was sitting on the marble steps, knees pulled to her chest, looking at the pattern of veins in a leaf she had collected days earlier. Lucky padded up, pressed his head against her ankle, and offered the rag like an offering. The texture of the rag, coarse against her palm, was enough for Emma to look down. For a breath she blinked, and the sound that came out was a tiny exhale that could have been a laugh. What followed was a patient sequence of exchanges that built a bridge. On a gray morning, Nathan opened the gate to leave for a meeting, and Lucky slid under the rail, tongue lolling, a soft sound like a sack of flour sighing. Emma was sitting on the marble steps, knees pulled to her chest, looking at the pattern of veins in a leaf she had collected days earlier. Lucky padded up, pressed his head against her ankle, and offered the rag like an offering. The texture of the rag, coarse against her palm, was enough for Emma to look down. For a breath she blinked, and the sound that came out was a tiny exhale that could have been a laugh. What followed was a patient sequence of exchanges that built a bridge. Rosa began to bring small treats. Maria left a piece of orange peel at the gate. Miguel whistled a tune. Aunt June slipped a soft blanket. Lucas watched from the street and smiled. Dialogue between Nathan and Rosa that day stretched into a careful dance. Nathan said, "Are you sure this dog is safe?" Rosa answered, "He looks like he belongs to the street, but he chose the gate." Nathan asked, "Do you think Emma will touch him?" Rosa replied, "She already has. Just now, she touched his ear." Nathan hesitated, "I do not want to force anything." Rosa encouraged, "You do not have to. Let Lucky be the invitation, not the medicine." Nathan whispered, "It is hard to let anything be simple." Rosa smiled, "Sometimes simple is the most honest thing." Nathan nodded, "Then we will offer him water and see." Rosa agreed, "And maybe a name for him, something she can say." Nathan suggested, "What about Jasper?" Rosa shook her head softly, "Lucky suits him." Nathan conceded, "Lucky it is then."
Across the scene, there were sensory details everywhere. The metallic tang of the gate latch, the warm thickness of steam from Nathan's cup, the damp aroma of the garden after rain, the soft rustle of Emma's skirt, the faint crunch of gravel beneath Lucky's paws. The ritual grew. Lucky appeared more days. Emma placed a tiny scrap of bread near him. Nathan found himself slowing his steps to watch. Conversations with neighbors multiplied. Mr. Patel brought up
A tin of dog biscuits. Clara from the next street called out encouragement, and Henry sent a text with a puppy emoji and a single line, "Keep the dog." One morning the ritual produced something neither Nathan nor Rosa expected. Emma, who had not spoken outside of monosyllables for months, reached into her pocket and drew out the small silver bracelet Claire had given her. Her fingers trembled, the chain cold and heavy, but she held it out toward Lucky with a careful deliberation that suggested she was testing the world. Lucky sniffed the bracelet, nosed it gently, and licked Emma's hand. A sound came from her then, high and clear like a bell, the single word "Mommy," as if speaking had been a door that one well-timed touch could open. The moment broke like a wave. Nathan felt his knees soften, the rich upholstery of his grief giving way to a wetness in his eyes. Rosa spoke in a whisper. You did not need to find a cure. You needed to find an invitation. The dialogue in that room expanded into a chorus of astonishment. Emma said, "Mommy." Nathan asked, "Did you just say that?" Emma replied, "Mommy." Rosa murmured, "She spoke." Nathan breathed, "I heard it." Emma looked at Lucky. "Is he a good dog?" Lucky wagged slowly, a small wet sound. Nathan laughed. "He is more than that." Rosa added, "He is a door, nothing more, nothing less." Nathan said, "Then we will keep the door open." Across senses, the air tasted of salt on Nathan's lips. The echo of the word hung in the chandelier, and downstairs the house seemed to inhale. That morning the radio in the kitchen crackled a song they all remembered, and for the first time in months the family shared a breakfast with a real exchange, with forks clinking and the familiar sour of orange marmalade on the tongue, a small, ordinary chorus that meant the world. But the healing did not follow a straight line. Tension gathered like storm clouds and threatened to undo what was fragile. A neighbor, Clara, well-meaning but loud, suggested they adopt Lucky officially and posted a photo online calling Emma brave, which attracted unsolicited advice and offers of money. Nathan, whose pride had been both a shield and a wedge, received messages from an old college friend, Thomas, proposing they hire a specialist and promising to arrange any help Nathan needed for a fee. Nathan bristled at the implication that charity should be transactional. One afternoon he pushed Lucky away, offering the dog to a shelter worker who happened to be passing by, and for a moment it felt like a betrayal of the small ritual that had begun to stitch Emma's world. The moment of humiliation and pride unfolded in slow paragraphs. Nathan felt a hot flush under his collar as he imagined people whispering about a rich man buying his way out of grief. He remembered Clara's post and the comments that compared him to celebrities who used pity as PR. He clenched his jaw, spoke sharply to Rosa about boundaries and dignity, and in doing so bruised the very person who had been tending the fragile life of his daughter. Rosa's reaction was quiet but pointed. She walked away with the broom handle feeling like a baton she did not want to drop. This conflict was heavy with sensory details. The harsh click of the shelter van door, the plastic smell inside, the metallic clang of social media notifications, the taste of cold coffee left untouched, the rough fabric of Rosa's apron scrubbing into her palms as she held back tears. The exchange rattled neighbors. Maria texted, "Are you okay?" and Miguel knocked on the gate with a worried face. Nathan, alone that night, stared at the muted glow of the television and felt the floor of his composure tilt. The rupture required repair. Nathan had to confront that his pride had nearly cost him a real chance at connection. He sought counsel from Dr. Evans, who urged him to listen rather than lead, to let Emma set pace. Rosa met with a speech therapist named Claire Reynolds, who brought playful exercises and a skepticism softened into patience. Nathan returned to the gate with a quiet apology, words that tasted of humility and felt like sandpaper against a wound. And he apologized to Rosa in a way that had texture and weight. Nathan said, "I am sorry I tried to make myself the hero." Rosa answered, "You were scared, not bad. Fear is loud." Nathan asked, "Can you forgive my clumsy hands?" Rosa replied, "They are hands. Hands can be gentled." Nathan offered, "I will not push Lucky away again." Rosa nodded, "Keep your promises small and often." Nathan agreed, "Small and often." This reconciliation scene involved practical steps. They arranged a weekly visit from a child play specialist. Aunt June organized a schedule where neighbors like Lucas and Mr. Patel would volunteer to bring treats. And Henry coordinated a small fundraiser through the community center so that basic vet care for Lucky would be covered without making it a spectacle. The sensory world softened. The smell of antiseptic in the clinic was tempered by the warmth of a mug Rosa held. The slick rubber of gloves felt less clinical when a hand held hers. And the soft padded bed in the clinic smelled of fresh cotton, promising rest. A crucial turn came when professionals confirmed what neighbors suspected. The interaction with Lucky was giving Emma a safe way to practice speech and social cues. Claire Reynolds explained with clarity and care, using simple language that Nathan could hold without dissolving into technical jargon. She demonstrated exercises that included naming parts of Lucky's body, practicing short phrases while petting him for tactile grounding, and using music to scaffold syllables. The sessions were full of dialogue exchanges between therapist, Nathan, and Emma, each longer, warmer, and braver than the last. At the same time, the family accepted help in practical forms that preserved dignity. Nathan allowed a modest stipend to cover Lucky's vaccinations thanks to a fund set up by Henry and Clara, but he refused to turn it into a public plea. Rosa received a paid leave to attend therapy sessions with Emma, and Miguel volunteered to do small repairs around the garden so Emma could have a safe place to sit and watch birds. These actions were humble, thoughtful, and framed by sensory details that made them tangible. The click of a syringe as Lucky received his shot, the soft thud of a ball as Emma learned to roll it, the warm smell of soup cooked by Maria and brought to the Avery kitchen, and the velvety feel of a new towel that Emma wrapped around Lucky after baths. There were moments of tension that required careful narrative slowing. One such moment was the first time Emma attempted a full sentence during a public event at the community center. The room was full of faces, under a light that hummed like a held breath, and Nathan's palms were damp. Emma stood beside Lucky, who was tethered to a leash, and for a long beat nothing happened. The internal conflict compressed. Nathan remembered Claire's face in the crash, feared ridicule, and imagined every whisper as an arrow. He thought of the bracelet in the dark of the drawer and felt that if this failed, silence would return deeper. Then Emma spoke, voice thin but steady, and said, "I love you." The room exhaled like wind leaving a building. Tears came, and for Nathan, pride and relief braided into a new kind of courage. This scene smelled of stage dust and cheap coffee, of the metallic tang of old folding chairs, and tasted like the sugar of store-bought cookies shared in the lobby afterwards. Another tensionful episode came when someone online suggested Lucky was a publicity stunt, and the comment thread filled with snide remarks. Nathan read them in the quiet of his office, the screen light carving his face into planes, and felt rage and shame curl together. He thought of the bracelet in the dark of the drawer and felt that if this failed, silence would return deeper. Then Emma spoke, voice thin but steady, and said, "I love you." The room exhaled like wind leaving a building. Tears came, and for Nathan, pride and relief braided into a new kind of courage.
This scene smelled of stage dust and cheap coffee, of the metallic tang of old folding chairs, and tasted like the sugar of store-bought cookies shared in the lobby afterwards. Another tensionful episode came when someone online suggested Lucky was a publicity stunt, and the comment thread filled with snide remarks. Nathan read them in the quiet of his office, the screen light carving his face into planes, and felt rage and shame curl together. He chose to respond not with outrage but with a simple video of Emma teaching Lucky a trick, filmed by Rosa with hands that did not tremble, a raw clip with the sound of the doorbell and the scrape of a chair. The choice to answer with authenticity diffused the moment. People left supportive notes instead, and a small community of strangers began to donate gently used dog toys to the clinic. The sensory texture here included the plasticky feel of donated toys, the soft squeak they made, and the faint smell of disinfectant mingled with the warmth of afternoon sun in the recovery room. As weeks passed, the therapy and the ritual braided into a new normal. Nathan learned to step back and be present without performance. He took a different kind of pride, one that tasted like humility, when Emma greeted neighbors
by name. She learned to ask for things, to say please and thank you, to call Nathan Daddy in an ordinary voice that did not carry the weight of a single finality. Lucky became a neighborhood figure. Lucas walked him to the corner store. Mr. Patel kept biscuits. Maria knitted a tiny scarf. And Aunt June read poetry while Lucky rested at her feet. The house itself transformed. Photographs of Claire remained, but now there were new pictures. Emma holding a paintbrush, Lucky dozing on a sunlit rug, Nathan at a small table teaching Emma how to roll dough, the smell of yeast and butter marking afternoons of shared tasks. 1 month later, there were tangible signs of change. Emma began attending a local art class twice a week. Her teacher, Sophia, reported that Emma now named colors and described textures with surprising specificity. Nathan had adjusted his schedule to be home when Rosa took Emma to the park. Lucky had a tag with his name and a small number from the clinic, and the cost of his care had been quietly covered by a community fund that Henry and Clara managed. The family had set up a small board in the kitchen with a calendar of speech exercises, volunteers, and appointments. The house no longer felt like a mausoleum. It hummed with ordinary domestic sounds, pots clanging, music playing softly, the light footfall of neighbors popping in. 3 months in, the neighborhood decided to celebrate with a small block party. The party was modest. A banner hung by Miguel read, "Welcome Back Laughter," and Aunt June baked cookies that filled the air with spice and sugar. Emma stood on a tiny improvised stage and recited a short poem she had practiced with Claire Reynolds, and she did so with her own inflection and timing. Nathan watched, feeling a presence in his chest that was both ache and joy. And after the recital, neighbors gathered to plant a small garden bed at the corner of the Avery property with a plaque that read, "For New Beginnings." Lucky sniffed at the soil, digging with honest enthusiasm, while Clara handed Emma a small trowel she used like a conductor's baton. And the sound of shovels against earth was like punctuation for that particular chapter of healing. 6 months later, the transformation had begun to ripple beyond the Avery gate. Emma now volunteered in small ways at the community center, sitting with other children and practicing reading out loud. The director, Pastor Lee, noted the measurable improvements in her confidence and speech. Nathan had begun to speak at local fundraisers about the importance of informal community ties for child development, always careful to center Rosa, the therapists, and the neighbors rather than himself. Lucky's presence had led to a local micro-program that trained volunteers to pair trained animals with children facing social withdrawal. The program listed names of volunteers like Lucas, Maria, and Miguel in its first brochure. The plaque in the garden had names of many hands that helped, including Aunt June and Mr. Patel, and visitors often stopped to read the small inscription and leave a token. Practically, Emma was enrolled in a speech and social skills program documented by Dr. Evans and Claire Reynolds, with progress reports showing steady gains in articulation and emotional expression. The house that once sealed its doors now opened them for a weekly reading hour that Emma hosted with Aunt June, and neighbors often stayed for tea that smelled of cinnamon and citrus. The epilogue of this story is concrete. A community garden, a plaque, a small nonprofit formed to continue the animal-assisted visits, and a family learning again how to live with presence rather than hide behind grief. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to see that small, persistent kindnesses remake what loss tries to take. Comment below. Have you ever seen a tiny gesture change a life? Write yes or no and a short line about the moment. Your words build a map of hope for others. Subscribe if you want more stories that show how ordinary people and ordinary animals create extraordinary changes. In the end, what remained was not a magical cure, but a succession of honest choices. To let a dog be present, to accept help without shame, to apologize when pride got in the way, and to keep showing up even when progress was measured in millimeters. The silver bracelet Claire gave Emma was no longer a waiting thing in a drawer. Emma started wearing it again, small and warm against her wrist, a symbol that memory and new life can coexist. The kitchen board still listed weekly helpers and speech prompts. Lucky's tag hung beside the calendar, and the small plaque in the garden reminded everyone that healing often began on a sidewalk with a wagging tail. If this story moved you, please share it and subscribe to the channel for more accounts of ordinary courage and community care. Sometimes the largest miracles are the simplest. A hand offered, a dog picked up from the street, and a family willing to let a quiet child be led back to voice. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.